I have seen a man get fired for stealing another man's soda. Story 1. I worked at an internet service provider about 6 years ago. There was a man who never really talked to anyone. He just seemed to sit in the back working, or so we thought. The man did nothing all day. When someone discovered that he had never completed a single ticket during his entire time in the network operations center, he simply said it was a good run, packed up his belongings, and left. He had been working there for over a year before anyone noticed. Story 2. I was fired because I had a death in the family and had to leave suddenly. No joke. I left quickly and did not get anyone to cover my shift. Even though I informed the supervisor that my brother-in-law and best friend since childhood had a massive brain aneurysm and I needed to go to the hospital as soon as possible. He covered my station, and I was fired the next day while still grieving and without any sleep. Story 3. I worked in a kitchen in a large hotel. A new employee was hired to oversee the operating costs of the kitchen, including how much money we spent and food production. The person who made the sauces and stocks was fired for using too much alcohol during cooking. He must be drinking it. We made over 20 liters of sauce every 3 to 4 days and stocks every other day. We ordered 150 liters of wine for that, which we shared with a preparation kitchen that handled events. That amount was too much for the new employee. After some discussion, my boss spoke to the hotel owner and told him that either the new employee would be fired or he would quit along with 3 other chefs. It turned out the new employee lied about having 20 years of kitchen experience in high-end restaurants and did not know much about the job. We never rehired the original sauce maker. Story 4. I took my dog Chance to the veterinarian for a procedure and had to pick him up a few hours later, which I did. I paid the bill, collected the dog, and let him out on the leash saying, "Come on, buddy." At that point, one of the veterinary technicians ran across the room and tackled me. Of course, I was shocked, and my dog, who was the sweetest, most loving little guy who only wanted to be everybody's friend, came to my defense and bit him. He was a Jack Russell Terrier, so he did not do much damage, but it was the thought that counts. Once the other employees pulled him off me and asked what was going on, he said, "This guy is trying to steal this dog. His name is not Buddy." I explained to him that the dog's name was Chance, but he was my buddy, my pal, my friend, my companion. The man was fired on the spot. The other technicians told me he was new and very strange from day one. Story 5. New hire, day 1, hour 1 at my grocery store. I was giving him a tour of the storage area. He grabbed a beer from a 6-pack, opened it, took a sip, and then just stared at me. I fired him on the spot before he even had his name tag. Story 6. A man asked his boss how to get fired without causing harm to the workplace or people. He was told that being late regularly or showing up to the wrong shift would do it, as would horseplay. The man said he would be late all week. The boss said that would not work because he had already notified that he would be late. They have strong labor protections in law. The man said he would show up for the wrong shift. The boss said he had effectively notified that he would not be there for his shift. This went on for 2 weeks. Eventually, the man understood and stopped complaining. One day, he came in 8 hours late, carrying an open beer, got on the forklift, and proceeded to do donuts in the parking lot. The boss walked over, and the man called out, "Am I fired now?" The boss replied, "You certainly are." The man seemed very pleased to be dismissed. It meant he could immediately claim unemployment benefits, whereas if he had quit, he would have had to wait 6 weeks. Story 7. When I was 15, I worked with an adult in her 20s who had a child and her own apartment. She got caught smoking phencyclidine in the walk-in cooler. This was at Baskin-Robbins. Story 8. Profits did not grow enough. It is not that we lost money, but the profit line did not rise sufficiently for stakeholders. Therefore, some employees were let go to reduce costs. Story 9. I was a supervisor for an overnight crew at a large retail store. We were allowed to wear earphones as long as one ear remained unoccupied. One of my employees had low-quality Bluetooth headphones that would constantly cut out, but he wouldn't realize it and would just play the next audio he was listening to. Normally not a problem, until one night, He was clearly watching inappropriate content as I walked by. We work nights and no other management was around. I told him to be careful and either not watch inappropriate content at work or make sure his earphones were actually connected. Unfortunately, it happened again during the shift changeover, this time with the store manager present. Story 10. I used to be a manager at Walmart. It has been 19 years since I last worked there, so this is an old story. I had to fire someone for scanning customers with the UPC scanner and inventory scanner tool they carried around. He worked in the pets department, was about 22, and was not mentally handicapped. He just would not stop and customers complained about it. He admitted to it. He scanned around 300 people or more because intrusive thoughts kept controlling him. We had to progress him through disciplinary action until he exhausted all warnings and steps. This cost him his job. He was a great worker otherwise, punctual and completed his work on time. He just couldn't stop scanning on the sales floor. He was not looking at them directly, just scanning them from a few feet away, aimlessly shooting the laser at men, women, and children. Nobody was safe and nobody liked it. Story 11. A forklift driver was drinking on the job and not cooperating when we tried to send him home for the day. I told him I would send him home in a taxi and we could talk in the morning. His union representative was present and told him that he could go home, come back sober, and deny being drunk. At first, he refused and wanted to stay at work. Then he refused the taxi slip and wanted to drive himself home. After 2 hours of back and forth, I ended up calling the police because he insisted on driving himself home while intoxicated. Police arrived and administered a breathalyzer test. He was drunk and was arrested. I do not know what other actions the police took. He returned the next day acting as if nothing happened. Human Resources had the police report and breathalyzer test results. That was all the proof they needed. The union could not protect him in that case. His union representative and I, as supervisor, were literally telling him to take a taxi home, come back, and deny being drunk. It would have been my word against his, and his union could have fought for him. Instead, he gave the company all the proof they needed. Story 12. I was chatting with someone who was just hired into the company. They were super chatty and excited about the engineering but said the chief executive officer was a doofus who could not find his ass with both hands. I just stared at the guy and left the elevator as the new hire heard someone behind them in the elevator clearing their throat. The chief executive officer. I never saw the poor man again. Story 13. The guy was a huge sports fan. His weekends revolved around watching whatever sport was in season. Once, the college team he loved lost, and a coworker said, "How about that loss?" The guy got angry and said, "You can talk about my mother, you can talk about my girlfriend, but you can't talk about my team," and took a swing. Boom, gone. All because of a college team. Story 14. A man pulled out his methamphetamine pipe with his keys while talking to the supervisor at the end of a shift. The supervisor responded, "And with that, please do not come back tomorrow." Story 15. Using a computer for adult content. He was warned, informed that he was being monitored, offered employee assistance for addiction, and told that if he does it again, he will be fired. He did it again the next day and cried when he was fired. Story 16. I have had to write 5 bullet points of what I accomplished this week for a couple of months now. It is such a simple task that you would think it is impossible to get fired over it, right? Someone wrote a poem and sent it in, thinking the military would find it cute or funny, like we work at a fun-loving startup or he was some type of comedy hire. No, he got himself fired for cause. Story 17. Not identifying a 65-year-old excise officer for a beer because, in my opinion, he should have identified me. Yes, I know the laws. Most states require asking for identification if a person appears under the age of 40. This man did not appear under 40. It was his decision. Story 18. Worked in a warehouse that operated on a point system for infractions. Saw one of the hardest and fastest workers terminated for 3 tardies totaling 5 minutes in a 6-month period. Yes, he clocked in 2 minutes late twice, followed by 1 minute late, and they fired him for it. Story 19. I was fired for telling my very good friend his mother is unpleasant after he said something stupid to me as a joke while I was passing by. He did not complain, but another girl who did not like me, and with whom I had already had problems previously, heard it and reported me to the owner the following day. Worth it. Story 20. I do not know if this qualifies, but it was unwise on her part. I worked at a Target Starbucks. I told her that we had a camera in the vent above the register. A week later, what does she get fired for? Stealing from the register. Honestly, I did not like her anyway, so I was glad she got caught. Story 21. Got too drunk at a company function and started criticizing a senior vice president. Was told to call it a night and sleep it off by the same very patient senior vice president. Continued anyway. Fired on the spot. Sent home on a flight unemployed. That is probably the wildest one I have seen. Edit. To clarify, I was a witness to this event. I realized I wrote it weirdly in the first person. Story 22. I got fired from Lowe's when I was 17. I worked in the lumber department and had just finished organizing my area at 7 a.m. before anyone had arrived. I was talking to the department cashier when my manager came up and asked if I had anything better to be doing. I said no. The manager said, "Well, if there is nothing for you to do, I guess we don't need you." Then took me to her office and told me I was fired. I was going to college in 2 weeks, so I did not really care. But that felt harsh, especially since I had never received any concerns about my work before. Story 23. I worked security for a company that had 3 shifts. A woman was hired for the 3rd shift, and on her very first day while on break, she went out to her car and fell asleep. She was promptly fired for that. Story 24. The person kept a rolling tray with bags of cannabis in the company vehicle along with other related items. I use cannabis, but keeping the entire center console stocked with smoking supplies in a shared company vehicle is unusual. Story 25. I used to be a supervisor at a blood plasma donation center. They started meeting employees who donate, but there were very strict rules. The most obvious was that you cannot alter your donor file as an employee. One young man decided he wanted a coupon so he could get more money for the next few donations. The problem was, employees were not given most coupons. These were emailed to the donors. One day, while he was helping a donor who brought in a coupon, he wrote down the code, went into his own donor profile later, and added the coupon into his account. The issue was we had access to a list of everyone who received an emailed coupon. We knew which ones were supposed to be available to employees who donated, and we could see who added a coupon or altered anything in a profile. The young man was caught, and another supervisor and I subtly asked him about it, giving him a chance to come clean. He lied and said he definitely got the coupon in his email and that there was no way he would ever alter his donor profile. Since he refused to admit the truth, the center manager brought him in with me as a witness and began questioning him. After presenting all the evidence, the young man confessed. He was informed that he would be fired because he had broken a major rule by altering his own donor profile. Additionally, he had used a coupon he did not have access to and lied about the entire situation. All of this was for an extra $20 in each of his donations for the next 2 weeks. Story 26. The owner of a restaurant where I worked saw what our new food runner looked like, and that she was a bit chubby and not conventionally attractive. He had her fired, saying she did not fit the image of the restaurant and that they should never have hired her. She did nothing wrong at all. He himself was a tall, skinny man who, despite being skin and bone, had a large beer gut. Story 27. It was a 6-figure remote job. The person was in graduate school and decided to spend the workday studying instead. His work declined and a pattern emerged. They discovered the issue and terminated his employment. Story 28. When I worked on my first oil rig, the catering and housekeeping crew were all recent former prisoners. A man was fired for having a Snickers bar on the helicopter back to shore. During a random bag search, they asked if he bought it offshore. He said his boss gave it to him, so they called the rig. His boss confirmed she gave him the Snickers, so the company asked for the receipt. She said she just gave it to him from the slop chest, which is where people can buy snacks offshore. Since she gave him the Snickers without paying, she lost her job and he lost his as well. Story 29. I was working for an internet comedy company partially owned by Will Ferrell. One of the other writers made fun of one of his movies bombing in front of some of the higher-ups. He was gone by the next day. Story 30. Watched a man get into a fistfight in an office because another man took his chair. We did not have assigned chairs, he just really liked that one. Story 31. Pulled the fire alarm just to see if it worked. The system called the fire department as it was designed. It also called the safety manager, maintenance manager, factory floor managers, and plant manager all at 2 a.m. They were not happy. Story 32. Falsifying time on a time card. They had sufficient leave. Charged the customer and could not be located where they were expected to be. Unprofessional. Story 33. When I was hosting a breakfast radio show, I took a day off and my producer covered the show. He had a voucher to give away for a local butchery and proceeded to award it to his flatmate on air under a fake name. His flatmate was also a station employee. They were caught when they went and collected the prize in station gear, using a station vehicle. The butcher, a major station client, immediately called the manager, who listened to the recording of that segment of the show and reviewed the provided closed-circuit television footage. They were both dismissed that day. Story 34. I'm a firefighter and emergency medical technician basic, and I work part-time in emergency medical services. One day while working at the fire department, the company director called me and ordered me to come in to work. I told him no, I could not because I was on duty. Then he told me if I did not come in, I would be fired. I told him I could not, and he fired me. However, the owner of the company is a firefighter as well. I told him, and he said not to worry, I am not fired. Story 35. Blatant sexism and a level of stupidity that frankly was amazing to behold in person. I work security, and an older man absolutely refused to take orders from any woman, our immediate supervisor, the account manager, anyone. The supervisor tried to work around him. I begged her to send him home for insubordination, but she opted to pass his orders through me, which I hated. I was asked to cover his inability to stand, so I worked outside without rotating inside to cool off, and he basically managed the phones. He did not obey her instructions to avoid a certain area during patrol and got a nail in his tire. He asked her to make me change it because he's darker. I confronted him and told him only his age was preventing me from sending him to the dentist. Against my judgment, I helped him change the tire. Watching him try was an absolute disaster. I did most of the work. Days later, he came to me with a multi-page handwritten letter to management explaining why our supervisor was unqualified. The letter was astonishing in its level of stupidity. I wish I had made copies. Phrases I remember. No woman could have changed this tire in that heat. Women are not fit to lead men. She is more suited to running a kitchen, not a guardhouse. I tried to talk him out of submitting it, pointing out it would likely be reviewed first by the human resources manager and the account manager, both women. He said, "You have to be blunt and truthful. You are too young to know how to talk to my generation." He submitted it and was fired. Weeks later, he claimed age discrimination and harassment. I had to answer many questions and took delight in disproving his narrative that he was mistreated. Story 36. I had a boss at a restaurant who emptied a 3-hole punch under a table, then told a busser to sweep the floor. When he came back into the room, he moved the table and saw paper chads still under it, so he fired the busser on the spot. Story 37. A colleague decided to try to get high by inhaling an entire can of room deodorant. He had never done it before but wanted to see if he could break new boundaries. I suppose he succeeded because he was taken away in an ambulance. Story 38. I had a doorman job where my girlfriend at the time worked, and she would come and visit me. They told me she could not spend time with me while I was working, and I said okay. She brought me lunch one day, and I was fired soon after that. Story 39. There was a man who was fired for harassment because a woman who was flirting with him had a boyfriend that worked there. She wanted to break up with her boyfriend, but they lived together, so she needed a place to go. He was not open to the idea. A friend of the boyfriend heard about the situation and told him. When the woman was confronted, she denied it, and the boyfriend made her go to human resources, so she did. The human resources representative told every new hire during orientation that if you get accused, you are out, and that is what happened. Their story was completely false. I know this because the man had told me several times about her flirting and wanting to break up with her boyfriend many times. She even told a story about being with another boyfriend and his best friend, recording it and showing it to her boyfriend. Almost every time he had to talk to her, she acted that way. He did not get involved with anyone who had a boyfriend, and he was not open to having her move in. Story 40. At summer camp for children with special needs, a manager was fired mid-season for advising a family of a child in a wheelchair to bring their own support person from home. This advice was taken largely out of context and seen as harassment, although I witnessed the interaction and the manager was always extremely kind. The situation was ridiculous and made the rest of the summer difficult, as management forced a random counselor, who had no interest in the leadership role, into the position instead. Story 41. The person refused to help other workers when lifting and transferring. I worked at a nursing home assisting seniors as a certified nursing assistant. Took months, but they were terminated. Story 42. The man paused an interview to conduct a drug transaction in the parking lot. I might have hired him as well. He was surreal. Story 43. The fifth time I had to tell her that she needed to let me know she was sick and staying home before her shift, not 30 minutes after it starts. I understand we get sick and sometimes think we can power through. However, no showing and calling 30 minutes after the start gives me a lot of extra work that could have been avoided. Story 44. At an old job, we hired 2 new employees. One told the boss he thought the other new employee was using drugs. There was no proof, and I did not remember him acting differently. The boss fired him. The other new employee did not show up the next day. The boss had issues beyond that. I expressed that he probably should not make decisions based on what a new employee says about someone else, because you do not really know anything about either of them. I was convinced the new employee was lying. Story 45. Using a tetrahydrocannabinol vape while on the clock in a paint booth. He offered to share with me and one other colleague. Management did not approve of that. Reflecting on it, I am pretty sure he was just trying to find a job that would allow him to practice his amateur rapping. From what I heard afterward, he was surprised that anything with a battery is considered an explosion hazard in a paint booth. Story 46. Most clients required impact gloves. To save money, the company stopped buying cheap gloves but was also stingy with the expensive impact gloves. A new employee did not want to ask for gloves, probably not knowing to ask for some. They should have provided gloves on the first day. He got hurt and went to the doctor. They fired him for not wearing proper personal protective equipment. Story 47. The company hired a man for the assistant manager program. On his second day, he pulled an intern into a closet as a joke. She screamed loudly, and he was immediately fired. Story 48. I was a bartender at a brewery when a cook came in looking really upset. I gave him a hug. The boss came outside, saw this, and fired me after the shift for inappropriate physical contact. The cook was crying on my shoulder for a full minute and even went to speak with the owner when I walked out the back. I had never received a write-up and I was a great bartender. The joke was on them. They closed a few months later, and I left the service industry. Story 49. I got fired once for telling a coworker I was thinking about looking for a new job, and he told the owner. Story 50. The new employee nodded off in the bathroom after injecting drugs on his first day. He was gone for over 45 minutes in a line-type situation. The supervisor caught him after we complained and pointed out his obvious, fresh track marks. He tried to argue and claim that they were old, as if that made it better. Story 51. A coworker constantly complained loudly about how poorly management was running things. The direction was wrong. Everyone was unhappy, and the coworker kept loudly talking about looking for other jobs. This coworker was literally the first and only person laid off from our team when the board asked all departments to lay someone off to help with budget issues after a financial downturn. Story 52. My roommate at a mortgage lender was fired because he did not reach his quota for appraisals. We had just finished training, and he had actual loans being processed, more than some of the established employees. However, when it came time to downsize, they were the first to go, and that was the metric that cost him his job. Story 53. They gave a 2-week notice. The manager fired them immediately and reprimanded them. You don't want to be here? Well, we don't need you. Leave. Story 54. Using a company credit card to put gas in a personal vehicle. I should mention it was a police department. Story 55. A man was fired for getting his girlfriend pregnant. Really? Yes, really. Why did that lead to his dismissal? Because his boss was his father-in-law. Story 56. One of our contractors was unexpectedly called into a meeting to deliver some papers to his boss. He was probably only there for a moment or two to ensure the boss received what he needed. The contractor was fired later that day for entering a privileged meeting as a non-employee. Story 57. I was working at Walmart years ago. A girl got hired, showed up for her first couple of training shifts, and then didn't come back for about 2 weeks. My friend, who was one of the managers, told me what happened. She apparently didn't see her name on the schedule, so she just didn't come in again until she thought something was wrong. Her name was indeed on the schedule. Her name was something like Nicole Johnson, but she went by Nikki, so she saw her real name, Nicole Johnson, on the schedule and assumed those shifts were not hers since she went by Nikki. Story 58. A new hire who did not own a car drove the company van home, a 45-minute drive. To make matters worse, they were pulled over while running errands in the large Sprinter van, and it was almost towed. Keep in mind this was only their second day. I wanted to fire them immediately, but when I asked for an explanation, they said the job was too far and they expected the company to pay for their transportation until they could afford their own vehicle. This person was 38 years old, and this was their first job. Story 59. Someone posted a racist meme in a group chat with coworkers, not realizing the supervisors were in the chat as well. Story 60. For eating his supervisor's luncheon meat again after he had been caught and warned previously for doing the same. Story 61. We are in a meeting and my colleague shared the wrong screen, where he had not safe for work content open via Discord. The manager was able to get a screenshot and did not include him afterward. Story 62. Telling a man who was not in charge of anything to be quiet when he came out yelling at them over something unimportant. Story 63. A colleague of mine requested to work remotely from Miami, but instead traveled to Colombia, South America, and tried to expense it. Security escorted him out the same day he returned. Story 64. They organized a wellness event at an office where I worked. For one of the activities, everyone had a sheet of paper at their desk. The idea was to go around the room and write qualities about each person on their sheet that we thought they embodied. In theory, the organizer wanted everyone to write supportive comments, but it quickly devolved into adults writing horrible names about each other. It was a scene straight out of the movie Mean Girls. What was even funnier was that this activity was held among 3 separate groups at the same time, and the exact same thing happened in each group. Ultimately, the organizer was fired about a week later. Story 65. I worked in a development shop building mobile applications in the early 2000s. Our office manager hired a senior developer they had met the night before at an event. My desk was behind his. He watched old episodes of Bugs Bunny for 3 days straight while I kept telling the manager that this guy was not competent. They finally asked for an update and, as expected, there was nothing to show. He just got up and walked out. Story 66. An associate spoke for about half an hour explaining his entire process for growing cannabis. Technically, he had the permits to grow legally, but on more than one occasion, he mentioned how he tested and refined his strain, which is not allowed in our job. Everyone knew this person was a cannabis user, but he still gave a full lecture to his new supervisor. It was quite funny when he finished, and the supervisor said, "That's it? Okay, cool. So, listen, we're gonna do a urine test real quick. Vacancy by morning." Story 67. I got fired when I worked in a Chinese restaurant because I made a whole bunch of egg roll boxes to block the door to the back room. I also put an onion in the boss's exhaust pipe. I was asking to get fired, though. I was a dumb kid. Story 68. I was a union steward for a man who was fired from a $25 per hour warehouse job for receiving oral sex from a prostitute right in front of a high-definition camera overlooking the dock. Human Resources asked if we wanted to see the video evidence. Thankfully, the man did not want us to witness his actions. Story 69. A coworker got intoxicated at the bar after the shift and went on the roof to start throwing debris at traffic. Police detained him, and that was the end of the incident. Story 70. He thought it was acceptable to bring a gun to work on federal property because he had a concealed carry permit. However, he crashed a golf cart and quickly realized it was not acceptable when they had him empty his pockets for a drug test. Story 71. I worked at a video rental store and got fired because I told my lazy coworkers to work. I was still on my 3-month probation period, so they did not need just cause to fire me. When I asked why I was being let go, the manager told me that I was a good worker with a strong work ethic, easy to train and reliable, but I was not meeting the job expectations. I asked someone who worked there if they knew more, and it turned out the manager was tired of receiving complaints about me from other workers who were lazy. Story 72. Worked at Best Buy. 1. The loss prevention employee was caught on tape allowing friends to leave the store with a fake receipt, stealing over $30,000 worth of televisions. 2. An associate was keeping gift cards that customers earned from purchases. This was unwise because the company tracks every single purchase made by employees. Story 73. This happened in 1995. My cousin, I, and 3 other men were fired from a job site. A troublemaker kept antagonizing my cousin because he was a quiet man with long hair. Finally, my cousin had enough and started fighting with him. His friend jumped in and hit my cousin from behind, so I restrained him. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, and no one pressed charges. We were all just fired and did not get arrested. Story 74. I had a man with no common sense who constantly messed things up. I asked him to wash and prepare vegetables. He filled the sink with hot water and dish soap and began washing the vegetables. The water was about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. He was washing mushrooms, lettuce, and other vegetables. I caught him after 15 minutes, but it was too late to save most of my produce. Story 75. Worked for commission doing door-to-door sales in Sydney, Australia. There were 4 of us on a crew of about 50 who occasionally managed to close more than 10 sales in our 4-hour shifts. A new employee was hired, and within days was submitting 10 to 15 completed sales every single shift from the start. About 2 weeks after his start date, he showed up to a shift and was promptly taken away in handcuffs by the police. It was obvious he was falsifying sales information, and management only had to verify by calling client numbers on the sales forms or following up on the banking information he provided. He was essentially faking $500 to $750 worth of commissions per day. Management identified the fraud immediately but allowed him to continue until the total stolen commissions constituted a felony rather than a misdemeanor. At that point, they contacted the police. Story 76. Not leaving a voicemail. I work for a retail electric provider in Texas. They say we are obligated to leave a voicemail because it increases the chance of our customers answering the second time we reach out. Story 77. Saw a kid at Walmart get fired for committing the same infraction 4 times. He was written up for it the first 3 times as well. He did it again and did not have any more write-ups. Story 78. A person dropped a bag of ice in front of my supervisor during police week at a workplace where officers came in and conducted public relations all morning by socializing and greeting the public. Story 79. A girl who was basically my work wife got in trouble for something related to a distraught client. She was called into a meeting about it, and afterward, she went straight to me to tell me what had happened. The supervisor saw her talking to me, called her back into his office, and fired her. While I do not want to go into details, later on my own supervisor told me why she got in trouble before talking to me, and it was not anything that should result in being fired. I can only assume she was fired for talking to me about it afterward. Story 80. I worked at a call center where a man was fired for zip-tying the exit doors shut. Another man was fired for telling a black coworker, "Get back to work, boy." The coworker threw a water bottle in response. The man reported the coworker for throwing the bottle, and both were fired immediately. Story 81. I admit I did not get to see it, but after I was let go before my probation period ended because one person was lying about me and not helping me learn the ropes in the office, he was suddenly reassigned to a new location and placed under investigation for sexual and racial harassment. This included making harassing sexual remarks to the black administrative woman and talking to black and Hispanic warehouse workers about their private parts. This happened multiple times. A second incident occurred about 35 years ago at a telecommunications company that had hired a highly educated engineer. At the one-year mark, he had produced nothing in terms of design. Background checks that had not been done beforehand revealed that he did not have any advanced engineering degree. He was gone quickly. Story 82. We had a man at the old warehouse where I used to work who came to work with illness and diarrhea, and he was fired for spending too much time in the restroom. Story 83. I work for a car dealership. He stole a car and then went drag racing with it at a legitimate drag strip. This car had been sold wholesale to another company, which had yet to pick it up. It was bright green and very noticeable. Story 84. A friend of mine was once fired because their manager did not show up to work and was unable to do the job. So they put the blame on my friend. Why? No, you have to do it unless you hire someone else. Story 85. The new employee left drug paraphernalia in the glove box of the delivery truck. There was a complaint from someone reporting that one of our trucks tried to run them off the road. The driver was under the influence and exhibiting aggressive behavior while driving. He mentioned having 5 children at home and was excited to support them with his new job. Story 86. I got fired because I made a joke on Facebook. Someone did not like it, found out where I worked, took a screenshot and sent it to Human Resources. After it was brought to the attention of my managers, they called me into the office to get the story. Was it actually me? Did someone else take over my account? Was I drinking? No, it was me and I was sober. They gave me unpaid leave for a few days while they conducted their investigation, then called me to tell me I was fired and to drop off my badge and keys at the security gate. I hated that job anyway, so I did not care too much. Now I just make my jokes on Reddit where they belong. Story 87. On a construction site, 2 employees told another employee to pull down their pants to prove their sex. Story 88. I fired my best friend's son during the dinner rush at Pizza Hut because he was outside riding imaginary bikes. Story 89. I was fired for calling in sick once, the only exception to my perfect attendance. I had a new job later that day, but still. Story 90. I got fired on my first day at a berry place because I was not fast enough to keep up. It was my first day. No wonder they could not find or keep anyone long-term. Story 91. I knew a man who was working overnight shifts. One morning, he was missing. I know one of the popular places to hang out and nap was the restroom. The supervisor went in there, kicked open the door, and the man jumped up from the toilet but fell back down into the bowl. Story 92. We fired a consultant who was pre-screened by his agency to work on Excel data input. He was not required to use formulas, just organize data in a sheet. He did not know how to open the start menu. He became upset because no one trained him. His wife was also upset because she kept getting involved. When he was fired, he said he did not need the job anyway as he was already retired. Story 93. In 2006, it took us 4 months to find the right database administrator and less than a day to let him go. He stole the chief executive officer's car and did not inform anyone. Security cameras caught him. Story 94. One of our night shift employees brought in a wireless router because we would let employees use the wireless network. He was discovered only because he unplugged my computer, and one night he forgot to plug it back in. Story 95. A woman working in a rehabilitation facility was stealing patient medications. The developer responsible for the inventory system lied about quality assurance testing and verification. The system had not updated customer prices for years. The system administrator was stealing company resources for personal use and was ineffective at their job. The theft might have been overlooked if the administrator could back up a server without causing a complete file system failure. Story 96. A person I used to work with on an information technology service desk was working on the chat service we provided for basic troubleshooting. He accidentally sent an OnlyFans link to a user on the chat instead of to a colleague on Microsoft Teams. Story 97. Ate the donuts in the storeroom. He decided to go in and eat all the snacks. A man told 3 managers in front of 60 people that they could not organize a simple event. He said if being stupid was a crime, they would be jailed for life. He was disgruntled because they were changing the shift patterns to suit the project, which would reduce transportation costs. Most of the team were looking forward to it. A guy thought he was being replaced when they were just giving him a team to manage if he wanted. He was so upset that he was passed over for the higher manager role and became insecure, sabotaging the team at every turn. He sealed his own fate. The man was a genius. He was doing alone what 5 of us ended up doing. They just wanted to help him because it was not sustainable, and the customer was willing to pay for the extra support. The sad part was they were preparing to give him a higher role too. Story 98. This high school student worked in a prepared foods department with several high school girls. He put cherry food dye in a girl's drink as a prank. The girl became very upset, was hyperventilating, had to call her mother to drive her home early, and said she felt sick because she thought it was something harmful. The next day, the student was caught red-handed on the security cameras and was fired immediately. He said, "It's a funny prank I do with my friends in high school. It's not a big deal." My manager was enraged and said, "If someone did that to my sister, I don't know what I would have done." Story 99. I work as a yard jockey, moving trailers on and off the dock doors. There was a kid no one really liked who kept messing up. He got fired for hooking up on a red light, but appealed, won, and was rehired. A couple of months later, he was attempting to help spot a driver as they backed into a tight parking space. The driver ended up ripping the door off the person helping. The helper kept walking between and behind the trailer while the driver was backing up. He was fired for not maintaining a safety bubble and not reporting that he was assisting the driver. He was also missing for 45 minutes after the door was found broken. Story 100. There was a large project where I worked for another company and was helping with the rollout. A small group of young people was also involved, hoping that if they performed well, they might get a job afterward. On the first day of training, I was talking to the younger participants. I admit I was a little tired and hungover, but still capable of doing the work. During the break, another person was talking about attending a rave over the weekend, using a drug called Molly, and speaking in a religious manner often associated with first-time use of MDMA. I told my workmate that I bet he would leave that afternoon. Sure enough, the come-down hit him hard. I had never seen someone go so pale so quickly and start sweating profusely. He did not return after that. Story 101. 3 of my coworkers were fired after getting into a fight off the clock and out of uniform with a man in our parking lot who was exposing himself and chasing people. They were leaving work fully out of uniform and defended themselves against him because he was threatening people with sexual assault. They were all fired because fighting at work is prohibited, even though this was a clear case of self-defense and they were no longer on the clock. They all received unemployment benefits. Story 102. The coffee machine in our office was broken. As IT professionals, we simply don't function without coffee. I was about to run a job against more than 1,000 servers. One small bug could cause significant problems. I really needed a good coffee. I crossed the street to get coffee from the fuel station opposite our office building. They did not like that. As a result, I was fired over a 50-cent coffee cup because I briefly left the office to get it. That was in 2013. Story 103. Stealing food just because a pizza box is in the common area does not make it community property, especially when it was labeled. We were happy they were fired. Story 104. An earbud in someone's ear. I was at Disney Springs with friends from out of state. A woman was passing out flyers saying that she was sexually assaulted at a restaurant or bar. She said that even though it was reported, nothing happened. There were other women in the bar or restaurant as well who were also sexually assaulted. She said a few weeks later she was fired because of an earbud. Story 105. A real estate agent was keeping rental money in her own account to accrue interest. She had been doing this for years until she tried it with my old man. He was demanding his rent money, but she gave him the runaround for a week or two. Eventually, he went to her office and stood in front of her desk until she produced the funds. She caused a big fuss because there were people waiting behind him, and he said firmly, "I've been waiting for my rent money for weeks. Let's have it." The manager came out to see what was going on. She was found out, fired, and jailed. Story 106. Job 1. I have been fired for doing what I was told. Come in and work whenever I want. I was also in on Friday when no one else was. Job 2. I was told the reason I was fired was last in, first out, even though my parents were just killed 8 weeks earlier. I needed work, but I was still fired and not actually told why. I believe it was so they did not have to pay me personal time to recover from losing both my parents on the same day. This raises many questions. However, my director seemed supportive, but their actions spoke louder than their words. The director never spoke to me again afterward, even when I reached out 10 years later. Actions always reveal the truth, which is often the opposite of the lie they want you to believe. Story 107. 2 employees sold company scrap aluminum leftover from a job. A $200 mistake cost them their jobs the same day, and the police were involved. Story 108. Fired because she was late too many times. She informed our boss that she might not arrive on time because she was coming from out of town. She ended up being 30 minutes late, and he let her know via text that she was fired. This is the same boss who allows a few other people to be constantly late for everything. Late to work, late going and coming back from breaks, leaving early because their child is sick or they forgot they had an appointment. They have even accused him of racism to his face multiple times, yet they still have a job. Story 109. A detailer and chauffeur for a car dealership was fired because the dealership manager believed he was driving the cars too hard, as the brakes were hot. Story 110. Showed up to work sober and was completely intoxicated by lunch. On camera as well, so his continuous falling into the wasteland was documented. Goodbye, Bildo. Story 111. 2 women in my office got into an argument one day over something trivial. One called the other an offensive term. It was really dumb. You don't call people that in the workplace. Story 112. Original poster. That's not really a dumb reason to get fired. Theft is no joke. People who will take something that does not belong to them without a second thought need to be removed immediately and without prejudice. Today it is a soda. Tomorrow it is a wallet. Unless you meant that the person being fired was unwise for risking their job over a soda. Story 113. When the wealthiest man on earth appeared erratic throughout the White House, displaying the eccentricity of Cesar Romero's Joker. Story 114. I felt it was a dumb reason to fire me. I shook a man's hand, and it felt like soft cookies. Time passed, and it turned out he was a horrible supervisor. One day, it all came to a head. He made a poor manpower move and did not inform me about it. Machines that were mine, which I had no clue about that day, went down for a long time. "Oh, those were your machines today." I got off my forklift and confronted him verbally, all because of his weak handshake. Edited to add. Apparently, some think I fought a weak supervisor. If I had done that, firing me would have been justified. So why would I have posted this? I confronted him verbally because he deserved it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.